Hello, Facebook. I wanted to chat about technology. I want to chat about games. I want to chat about individual sovereignty. I want to chat about swarm/hive mind. I want to chat about the technocracy. The technocracy? Yeah, those, whoa, lighting, chill. Talk about the way that we are living in these cyber realms as well as the IRL, or in real life meet realms. And I wanted to talk about a game called Vicarious, in which you can control me as a human avatar. And I understand the different perspectives on both sides. Some people really want to go back to farm life, organic, bare feet on the soil, hugging people, and I'm 100% in that camp. And other people like their ability to shapeshift with their online personas, to have the anonymity and autonomy, to disappear, to go across the globe at a ping of a computer. And I'm also in that camp. You know, I love technology. I love video games and the potential for these techno tools to actually bring us closer to our humanity. But I'm also aware of that insulating effect. And I feel it myself. If I'm on a computer for a good chunk of the day, I start to go into this weird haze. And so I want to have that conversation. If anyone here is passionate about this, drop some comments or even jump on live and discuss it with me. Because there is this debate around transhumanism and maybe posthumanism, which are very different terms. There are ideas around cyborgism. There are ideas around the future of smart cities and 5G and microchips and all this kind of thing. And I kind of feel that it's inherent in these tools that they can be used for destruction or creation. They can be used for enslavement or freedom. I think the internet is such a powerful tool. It's such a voice of democracy. We get to have the grassroots, pull out a video camera in your phone journalism, which is, exposed so much. And yet it can lead to mass surveillance. Hey, Doug, the internet is a conduit for memes to possess humans. It's definitely, and so that word memes, that's a really important word. A mimetic culture is when we share things, we echo, it's like a ripple, we copy each other, we mimic each other. And I think this is inherent beyond technology, that this is a way that we human beings share and alert each other to things and share trends and create a collective culture that shows the villain, the hero, our humor, all these kind of things. And so I'm interested to say it's a conduit for memes. Totally. I mean, we often share memes. I think it's a quick kind of like flashcard of an idea, and also using humor often, or archetypal iconic moments to share something which is maybe a bit more complex or a bit harder to sit with. And it's to possess humans. Cool. So I take it from that comment that you are on the side of thinking that we are becoming sort of technocratic slaves, that there is this new rising power with the likes of Google and Facebook and even SpaceX and Tesla and Amazon, all these kind of things, that they are wanting to manipulate us. I'm interested in any more details on that. I guess for me, I love this narrative that's played through much of our sci-fi, this idea of this hacker counterculture, that the people on the street start to be just as skilled and have just as much power technologically as the big powers, as big companies or as the government or whoever the ruling elite is. And there's a series called Mr. Robot that just covers that. There's lots of this movie back in the 90s or early 2000s called Hackers, which is a really iconic movie. I love that one. And we've told it even before that with, Neuromancer and sci-fi from William Gibson and other people back in, when was that, like the 70s, maybe earlier, 60s, 50s. I think the term cybernetics, that doesn't even necessarily relate to the cyber realm as in digital. It's kind of talking about this idea of technology coming and merging with nature. So we've got like biomimicry. Yeah, so we've been ruminating, we've been chewing over this idea of machines mixing with humans, of potentially leveraging this, ghost in the shell, ghost in the machine kind of idea of can a spirit or consciousness come into a machine? Like literally, can you upload yourself? Or if we advance AI far enough, there was that movie by Steven Spielberg, I think it was called AI. I didn't actually watch it, but I get the concept. Or the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix, amazing movie, where if AI progresses far enough, can it spark consciousness? Jungian, I'm just reading a comment here by Doug. Jungian archetypes with their own will, separate from their physical substrate, taking over our bodies. Yeah, cool. I totally understand that. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that because philosophy, psychology, and all that human beings code into these machines will be that basis for the further education and a reference point for the AI. If we've got archetypes in our psychology, if we've got these kind of iconic assemblages of, the witch or the priest or the villain or the whatever it is, whatever archetype you're working with, it does make sense that would start to appear in the AI's understanding. And then you've got things like Neuralink, which is proposed by Elon Musk, and I'm sure there's a whole company and a lot of people behind that, but he's the poster boy for it, where they've got this interface to directly plug into the brain. And then the other conversation comes up, is the brain the mind? Or is it like a wetware interface for consciousness, which is beyond the body? Regardless, I think we'd all admit, if you're messing with the brain, you've got a lot of control. You can make things twitch and go up and down, and obviously we've chemically altered it for many, many decades, and understand the power of shifting hormones and chemicals and different, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors and all these kind of things, SSRIs and things. So there's lots of ways we're already doing that. So yeah, for sure, biomechanically, what's that going to bring? And will we become these puppets? Cam, mixing clay with iron. Nice. I like the idea of humans being clay. I assume that's the association there. I really, with open world theatre, I often bring people back to aspiring to be like clay, to be malleable, to be willing to be anyone and be anything. I think that's kind of where you come into post self-help, where we move beyond trying to understand ourselves and protect our identity and have our sovereignty and sort of guard what I think is inalienable from us. I totally want people to have consent and boundaries and hold standards and have freedom of speech and, personal liberties and sovereignty. I fully respect that. But I think that if we approach that from a fear basis, then we are always holding it too tight. I'm not sure if you've been in a conversation with someone where they're kind of defending a boundary with a bit too much force, and it just starts to be repellent. We can't really engage in the conversation. And yet someone who is really confident about their freedom or their power has a really casual, like, oh no, I'm going to do this, or, I'm not like so worried about your opinion because I know I have the power to do it anyway, or I'm not like forcing the point. I'm telling you I'm going to do this, or I can do this, or I have done this, but I don't need to make it a big ego show about this thing. So I think that's one of the things that we can get to when we stop defending our identity in whichever area it is. And it could be to do with something that's a bit more contentious and charged at the moment, like gender politics or race relations, or literally just politics, left and right, Republican, Democrat, or whatever you might have in the country that you're in. I think beyond needing to enforce that, we are more willing to be adaptable. It's like looking at a child and a parent. My son's 18 now, so I've kind of passed that stage of needing to fight with a toddler. But sometimes young kids have a really passionate, actually anyone, we all do this sometimes, we've got a really passionate opinion, and then the older / sometimes wiser side can go, okay, cool, like I'm not going to argue on that point. I have a soft grip. You can think that, or you can think this. I don't need to put my stake in the sand. And this soft grip becomes more malleable, and we're more willing to look at various sides. And perhaps that's a privilege. Perhaps when we don't have privilege, we do need to fight still. So I know there's many sides to this argument. But coming into our malleability, the reason it's relevant for the discourse in this live, is that I'm interested in being malleable, in being no one, without any self-deprecation, without losing who I am, but being willing to hand myself over in this game called Vicarious, so you can live vicariously through me. And the idea is, what can the hive mind or the swarm potential do? What can we as a collective leverage in our various skill sets and various networks to then infuse that into one person, which is a huge privilege. Like, imagine all these people working to raise you. You know, they say it takes a village to raise a child. What about it takes a nation or a species to rise and raise an individual, an adult? Like, what a privilege that would be. To have all of these people leverage their problem-solving potential to help your life improve and potentially be, you know, remunerated from it. Hopefully in this game, as you play, you get rewards for improving people's lives and things like that, or you can share in the fruits of your labors. And also not being locked into their subjective biases or inhibitions. It's like, oh, you should just go and talk to this room full of people and sell your product. Well, maybe me, I might not want to. I might be nervous, or I might think I don't. I mean, in my case, it's not quite the case because I work a lot with freestyling and expression and creativity and that sort of thing. But let's just say a general person playing Vicarious, they might just be propelled forward within their capacity. They still have the capability to speak, but their identity might say, oh no, it's something I would never do. But if you've really submitted to the game and they say go and present to this boardroom, you just do it. And so imagine having all these people help you, even goad you, push you, spur you beyond your personal inhibitions and our habits. Like, you know, maybe I don't want to wake up before 7 a.m. or I want to eat this particular thing. Like, what is the potential for all of us to help our self-obsessions, our addictions, our personal subjective limitations based on story? How can we get around those as a collective? And it can be pretty scary because it would mean trusting someone else with your life. Even if it's small decisions about where you work or what conversation you have, what you wear, when you wake up, what you eat. But this is the space that I want to explore. Cam says, fractal spiral hive mind. Well, yeah, I mean, fractal, yes, that could come into it. I think, I mean, obviously fractal is the idea of this mirrored, you know, the molecule relates to the celestial, or the macrocosm to the microcosm. And so you could eventually have a network. You could have an individual. If my mind, when you talk about fractal, would imagine on a molecular level or biometric level, something happens in our body and then fractalize out to the individual, then I copy that. So I act like my molecules are acting in my life, and then go beyond that to my business. So my business has to mirror my individual actions, and then my business is mirrored by the whole nation, and the nation could be, you know, that's how I would see fractal hive mind spiraling outwards. But in this case, it's just very simple. It's an individual like myself turning on a Facebook Live or a Zoom call, or hopefully soon Twitch. If you are on Twitch, I'm not really very active on there, but my profile is called The Human Avatar. So check out there. I like to get some of these games running on Twitch, whereby I literally just strap this exact phone to my head or to my chest, and I go into the world. I've got you in my ears through my headphones, and there's 3 roles, the RGB, red, green, blue players. So they're in a Zoom room, and they can see through my front-facing camera what I'm doing. And then the red person is taking care of my mental and physical well-being. The green person is taking care of the creative interaction with the immediate environment. And the blue player is taking care of the logistics and the strategy of what to do and where to go to. I'm not going to go into too much details about this game, but I think you get the idea. It's basically online people controlling a real person in meat space, as in like IRL, in real life. And at the moment, it's non-invasive. It's literally just attaching a phone to a harness. But as we advance with these peripheral devices, as we advance with, you know, experiments like Neuralink, there's going to be more and more integration. You know, I've actually just started playing a game called Cyberpunk 2077, which came out, I think it was last year. There's a lot of hype leading up to it by Project Red, and it's bringing a lot of these ideas, which is from our sci-fi, but it's bringing it into this idea of the integration of circuitry into our bodies, and, you know, phantom limbs, and leveraging big data processing. And this is something that Elon Musk is saying is necessary for us to keep up with the evolution of technology. And he is personally pretty pessimistic, or at least cynical, about unleashing this AI potential into humanity, because it's going to accelerate beyond us so quickly. There'll be that singularity moment where it starts to invent itself, or it starts to upgrade itself, so human beings are no longer even in the picture. And that is actually a goal with a lot of AI. There's a book I'm listening to on Audible at the moment called The Architects of Intelligence, which is really fascinating. It's all these interviews with leading technologists and AI programmers and all that sort of thing. And a lot of them are aspiring to what's called AGI, artificial general intelligence. So it's something you don't have to program, you just sort of expose it to life like you do with a human, and it kind of learns for itself. So this is the space we're getting to where the AI is going to program itself, and it's going to be like in the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix. It's so far advanced compared to the rate of learning that we have. And of course, it can communicate to all these sensory inputs and outputs across the Internet of Things. And we're just going to be like a primate compared to this sort of thing. So Elon Musk is saying that we need to have this tertiary layer. We need to have whatever the layers of the brain are. You've got the monkey mind. You've got this other section of the mind, which is more of our what we would consider our logical mind, and then we've got this third layer, which is going to be this techno interface. And you can start to use Google in a more intuitive way. I mean, probably not Google, but you know what I mean, like this big data search engine, and you'll be maybe seeing it in something like HoloLens. I'm not sure how it would feed into our bodies. Maybe it would feed in chemically. Maybe you just feel differently like we do currently. If you imagine something that can affect our hormones, can affect our heart rate, all these sort of things. So I'm not sure exactly how the information from something like Neuralink would start to affect us. But they're definitely experimenting. They've already got, which is pretty hard to look at, but they've got these, monkeys which have these brain implants, and they can steer racing cars around tracks and all these kind of things, which of course for someone who has limited mobility, if you're paralyzed and on this exoskeleton mech legs and you can walk around, like that's amazing. And I'm sure such people would be quick to volunteer if it had potential of enabling to be mobile in the world. So I totally see the potential for those sort of things, or maybe even regaining eyesight or hearing or all these kind of things. But then on the other side, there is this foreshadowing of AI becoming way smarter and more powerful than us, and maybe deciding that human beings should be wiped out just to balance the earth. And B, if we do have Neuralink to try and keep up with AI, is that used maliciously or malevolently by our new technocratic dictator who then uses people as puppets? This is the dialogue and discourse, and I'm very aware of that. And yet for me, I don't think limiting our experiments and our innovation is a way to success. I don't choose safety. I don't choose carefulness. I don't choose the ignorance is bliss approach. And yes, things like atomic bombs do get made because human beings, unfortunately, are spurred by various things like being power hungry or being fearful of someone else and wanting to wipe them out before they wipe you out. And hence we have never-ending wars. But I'm also aware of the potential for things like, in this case, atomic fission. Like, I'm not making an argument for nuclear-powered things, but basically that one tool of destruction can be used for other non-sinister, non-destructive ends. Same with information and knowledge and communication, and the ability for we humans to start being post-human. And I'm not necessarily arguing for transhumanism. I know that's a whole debate, and how much do we interfere? Do we 3D print entire human beings, or do we grow them from stem cells, and what the moral implications of that are? I don't have a huge gut reaction against it, but I also understand it needs to be really looked at. It is interesting, though, as if we ask ourselves what's human and what's not human. You don't have to go very far back in our medical journals to see some pretty offensive things nowadays, stating things like whether it be a particular people of a particular race or a particular sexual orientation were like subhuman, going back to the ideas of eugenics. So literally a few decades ago, that's how we were classifying certain people. And yet we are very quick to do the same thing for robots, calling them artificial intelligence. Like, how long is it going to be before they start having their placards or being out in the streets occupying movement for their rights, for robot rights? And this is something which is openly opposed by some engineers, saying we can't have robots ask for rights because then I guess they're going to take over and become too powerful, and we need to keep them, pretty much saying we need to keep them as slaves, that we need to have a limiter on how much power an AI, artificial intelligence, or robot, or cyborg, or whatever, could have, so that they don't take us over. But, oh, there's a bumblebee coming right into the room here. so huge. Nature's designs are amazing. See, I mean, I think that if we follow biomimicry, if we follow natural symbiosis and syntropic approaches, meaning life supporting life, I don't think we'll get to a point of genocide. I don't think that AI, if it's working with natural systems, and this is the thing, if we have AGI, if we have the singularity, it's not going to be purely relying on the biases and prejudice which we naturally input in the foundations of things that we control as human beings, even if we don't mean to. There's that, what was that racist output of the Google face identification at this big conference? They're like, look at our technology, and then it classified an African American woman as an ape or something like that. And these are the sort of ramifications or output from our unthinking biases, from just simply the way we input data, the way we phrase things, the collection of sample materials that we choose to put into the system. It's going to naturally reflect some of our inbuilt prejudices and limitations as a patriarchal, heteronormative, whatever society we currently live in, whatever's the normal, that's going to naturally leak into these quote-unquote blank canvas robots. And so I think the benefit of having AGI, artificial general intelligence, is the fact that it's going to expose itself to nature, to life. It's going to observe, not just listen like an obedient child to the parents' indoctrination and dogmatic view of the world. Instead, it's just going to observe, and I would think observe nature itself. That's what I would do if I was AI. I would look into biomes, I'd look into molecules, I'd look into different climates, I'd look into animals, and look into all these different ways that things survive. And generally in nature, there's this beautiful design where it's a cyclic system, meaning things come in, and it's not like a wasteful system. Not like us, we just bury our rubbish. Things dissolve, things get reused, things get composted, and the death becomes the new life. So it's a lot better of a design, much more sustainable and regenerative as the natural system. So if our AI supersedes us and outgrows our human control through programming, I believe it will observe nature, and it will want symbiosis. Sim, together, bio is like life, so life being together. And syntropy as opposed to entropy. Entropy is this idea of everything's moving away from each other and getting weaker and weaker. Syntropy is life supporting life, so things coming together. And there's syntropic agroforestry, and there's permaculture, and there's all these technologies which we are innovating, which is really just going back to nature and working out how to leverage the natural wisdom within nature. So I think AI will do the same thing. I'm just going to read this comment here. Cam says, this topic, the root of which I can see comes down to a question of, is there a soul or spirit to a living entity? Is that distinct and different from however advanced AI is made? Yep, totally. It does come to the question of what is spirit, what is consciousness, and that's a philosophic and spiritual kind of debate. But I think, there's a fancy word. Is it epistemologically? Maybe not. Basically, there's a word which means if evidence can be shown in a result, and not just theoretical, but if there's a product, or if something can be shown through social experiment. So I think that if we can have a behavior which exhibits consciousness, whether it's conscious or not, is kind of beside the point. I mean, it's a nice philosophic concept to be amongst sentience. We are settled with that idea. We'd probably rather hang out with, obviously, with a human compared to something which we think is just a computer. But we'd probably want to hang out with a pet as opposed to a computer, because there's a sentience in it. But in a practical way, if we're talking about social change, if an AI or computer can be so evolved that it behaves as such, that it displays emotions, that it has morals and ethics, that it has agency, that it can make decisions, that it can build itself like any other engineer or innovator of a human being, does it really matter if it's conscious or not? I mean, in a practical way, no. It totally doesn't make any difference. To us, in a romantic or sentimental way, it probably does. You'd want to dig down and go, no, I know below this is still just code, so I'm not going to treat it the same. But maybe it's just a really good social experiment and lab test for us to break down our prejudice and our bias. And like I said, just a few decades ago, we were calling certain human beings inhuman because of certain things. And so I think there's a great chance for us to have a clean slate on something which we are not going to be as ingrained in as like race wars or sexual gender politics. But it is literally it's code and it's technology that we've built. So there's not going to be those prejudices in there. However, there's always fear. There's a lot of people do fear even the current laptops and, being mind controlled by the mediascape and that sort of thing as well. And I'm not negating or arguing that it can't be used for that, because it definitely can. It very definitely can. And it has been shown to be done that with targeting, through Facebook or whatever, targeting certain or creating echo chambers so that you see certain things, you get sold certain things, you have certain opinions, and even world news can show that certain things are happening in the zeitgeist, in the collective attention. Oh, everyone's doing this or everyone's doing that. Not really. It's just sort of a curated version, a mediated reality. So it's totally already happening. And I guess my point of this live is, and if you've followed this far, you're probably a geek like me. Hey, Jordan, he's here too. So Jordan, who's just joined, I'm co-creating a game, which is his project called CivilX, or Civilization Explorer. And we really want to leverage this capacity for technology to enable a very human life and a connection with nature, connection and community. How can we get people out into the open and that sort of thing? So that's a perfect example. You want to check it out, go to civilx.world. But I guess the point that I was coming back to was this idea of consciousness and sentience and trust. And with AGI, artificial general intelligence, my argument is that if it is going to learn through observation as opposed to being trained, I believe that AI will come to a natural balancing opinion, and it won't just try to wipe out all human beings. Now, some people might say, what happens if it takes on a point of view which some people are attributing to people like Bill Gates? Once again, I'm not siding with any argument, just stating these in the zeitgeist, saying that such people favoring eugenics, people that created, what are those stones, the rhinestones? I can't remember. There's a particular, like a Stonehenge kind of thing, but was made recently. It was a big public sculpture kind of thing, and engraved in it were these intentions stated out. And one of the intentions was to stabilize the human population at, what was it? It was a really low number. It was like 1 billion people or something like that. So yeah, there are these ideas that human beings could come up with ideas which seem to apparently be environmentally friendly or sustainable, regenerative, which involve mass genocide and a lot of destruction. So arguably, an AI might come up with a similar decision that, yep, in order to be most syntropic, symbiotic, balanced, we do need to wipe some people out. So yeah, potentially that. And wouldn't that be an uncomfortable decision to make? Imagine if we were purely what one might say logical, completely unemotional. And it's like, I'm not arguing for this, but I'm just saying, if that was found to be scientifically true, what would we do? Do we just keep reproducing and overpopulating? I mean, I think with correct use of technology, much underutilized land, and a lot of different architectural solutions and a lot of different social solutions about how we live and work together can be made. So we're not going to overpopulate. Like, a lot of that is to do with our destructive the impingement we make upon nature because of our unsustainable industries. So potentially with greater number of people, but better technologies, we wouldn't be overpopulated. It's just kind of like our way of life with this number of people is overpopulated. So there's a lot of sides to the argument, and anything with these kind of ramifications, if they're going to change society, needs to be looked at from so many angles. But what would we do? Would we, if we realized we were overpopulating, would we volunteer to not have kids? And that is enforced in some countries, like I think China does that. Would we, like Elon Musk is trying to do, try and populate other planets? Would we volunteer to be a different type of refugee where a bunch of us just go into the uninhabited places, move away from the metropolis and go back to farm living? I think that makes sense. I often thought that with this current refugee crisis, with so many borders closed and so much strife happening that people want to get away from, why not have new citizens, these people who are currently have a refugee status and are willing to do the work, are willing to seed a new life and are not attached to the existing culture so much in whatever country they're going to because it's new to them. Maybe they would volunteer to go, for example, in Australia. A lot of people live on the edge down the east coast, going right into the centre and farming there or trialling new techniques and that sort of thing. Maybe that's a way that we could do things. But I wonder what would we do? And I think on the outskirts is the idea to voluntarily die, euthanasia, suicide, all these sort of things. I mean, I don't think that would be what many of us would choose. And then how would we respond to a benevolent robot that was deciding to cull some of us, like we humans do with kangaroos or whatever? If we love kangaroos, but there's a few too many here. We're just going to go around and open hunting season, so that's fine. So maybe robots would open hunting season on humans. And then the question is, should we prevent that if we knew the outcome would be sustainable regenerative life? Or should we just enslave such tools of potential mass murder so that we can continue being destructive and potentially wipe out all life on planet Earth through our current trajectories? You know, it's in an emotional way, it seems obvious. Like, of course we don't allow robots to kill human beings, like obviously. And there is that credo of robots. And that's a funny thing, like before studying, not that I had to study coding, I'm not much of a coder, you know, I am studying it and I'm learning a little bit more about the malleability of code. But I remember first hearing about these laws, these kind of fundamental moral dictates for robots, and one of them was that, you know, you can't cause harm to a human being. But I mean, that is just like any declaration or declaration of human rights or a constitution or whatever. It's just rules that can definitely be broken or rewritten or overridden or ignored by code. So even though that is kind of like something nice for humans to think, that robots have this order where they can't hurt human beings, that's not true. Especially when you look at the idea of drone warfare. It's already happening. Like, robots are already killing people at the direction of human beings. So that fundamental principle of robots not being able to hurt human beings is already not working. It's already antiquated in certain spheres. So yeah, here's my 500 million. Cam is stating the Georgia Guidestones. That's it. Yes, thanks for that. And Cam's also got a question here. What is the source of love? To know love, surely we must know ourselves and the source of ourselves, the source of love. If we view love from a reductionist material view, we get to say it's biochemical, oxytocin, etc. If you view love from nature, of the self, the soul, spirit, then there's a distinct difference. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. I personally don't think that love is purely materialistic. Like, it's not just a mix of chemicals. That could totally be argued by people who are really, science, material-based, and potentially atheist. But what I would say is that I think we can still experience and perceive a more spiritual love without knowing ourselves. Because I think this self-inquiry, which is really promoted in the modern world with self-help and life coaches and positive psychology and all this idea of like, know yourself, love yourself, all that kind of thing, I definitely think it works. It assists us in having nicer feelings, and we do look at a lot of our shadows, our negative unconscious behaviors and habits. But I would argue that even if someone didn't grow up in a culture where there was this level of self-inquiry, self-awareness, and both science and spirituality working to uncover the source or the meaning of things like love, you would still feel that love, even if you didn't know yourself. I think it's this innate, inherent thing, of soul, of wavelengths, of art, of beauty, of consciousness. And therefore, if we don't have that, even if AI looks like it's got consciousness, if it doesn't have that consciousness, would it not truly be able to have that innate loving compassion? Would it always be a play? And there is this simulation hypothesis that we are already in a video game. I was also listening to this book recently called, The Simulation Hypothesis, saying that, potentially if we're not in one now, we soon, if our technology keeps evolving, be able to get to a stage where we can actually build whole realities. And my pondering upon that brings me to the idea that whether or not it's factual, whether or not we are actually in a computer simulation or not, we are behaving pretty much that way. Because when you look at our almost automaton behavior, our programmed reactive reactions, when we say things we don't mean, or we just lash out at someone, or we've got addictive behavior, which is going on a program not of our intentionality. There's a lot of this, what looks like programmed behavior. And you could say that our subconscious mind, or that reactive part of our behavior, is like our programmed algorithms. It's like there is some part of our consciousness which we are not intentionally authoring, just like an AI is not intentionally authoring its source code, that we are acting and living in response to. And then when you look at the idea of rendering a universe and applying physics and things like that, I think we've got this rendering engine within us. People that are maybe colorblind, or that have, what's the thing? I don't think it's, different words are coming to me. Carpal tunnel syndrome. I don't actually know what that is, but I'm thinking of something to do with inner ear inflammation. You get up and suddenly you're dizzy, and it feels like the room is spinning. It's not really. That's because our inner rendering engine of reality has got a glitch in it. It's telling us that our body is, off balance, and we fall over even though nothing is happening externally. So we're already living in a space where the input to us is creating a secondary reality outside of the actuality, which is our subjective reality based on our interpretation of the signals. And we are behaving based on subconscious circuitry, on ingrained, whether it be archetypal things or hypnotized things or pain-driven subconscious things, whatever it is. We've already got that programming. So I think that we're already kind of living in a simulation, even if we don't actually live in a reality where this is actually made by aliens and there's, we are actually just computer bots. And if so, maybe it gives us more compassion for AI, because maybe this is what it feels like to be an NPC, a non-player character. Maybe you and I are just like non-player characters in some other person's hero's journey. And I want to have my liberty. I want my rights. I don't just be deleted with the next save game or load game or exit, quit, control, delete. And so maybe this is exactly what it feels like to be AI. We can subjectively fight to say, no, I am consciousness. I have feelings. But that's also an interpretation of signals. I think we are an illusion, like reality is drugs. We are trying to piece together some sense. We are sense-making through storytelling and the somatic reality of what we're feeling. But even that, me tapping, that tells me I've got a body because I can feel it. But what happens if that is just a signal being interpreted by a computer system that is then telling me I'm feeling something? You know what I mean? Like, it is possible that I am just a program. It is possible that this is what it feels like to be an artificial I, which is why I like to call, rather than artificial intelligence, I like to call it algorithmic intelligence, meaning that an intelligence that is based on certain patterns of decision, which is, I think, what we are. We have certain cultural programming, we've got certain subjective programming, we've got certain biases and stories, we've got this self-created identity, which is pieced together from our experiences and the consequences of past decisions. And that is an algorithm in itself. You could probably think, oh, if a bowl of custard is put in front of you, you know what you're going to do. If you're lactose intolerant, you're not going to eat it. If you love custard, you're going to eat that. If karaoke comes on, some of you will be like, yep, I'm first to jump on the mic. Others will be like, never going to get up in front of that. That's not based on the moment, often. It's based on an algorithm. It's based on a pattern that we inlay to say, this is how I operate. And often it's laid into us externally. You know, I've been looking at some of the footage from what I assume is, once again, it's a mediated reality, so who knows where it comes from, but I'm told by my computer that some of the footage I've been watching in the Gaza Strip between Israel and Palestine is a real-time occurrence. And I say it with that level of like disbelief because that's what this whole live is about, interpreting signals and how much we take for granted. So once again, back to this point, these people are apparently shouting, and I don't speak the language, but in the subtitles tell me that these Jewish people in Israel are shouting about death to all Arabs and things like that. And I was watching this, and of course, you know, it's upsetting seeing that kind of, if it's true, like if this is real-time footage and it's being translated correctly, if that's what's happening, it's upsetting, and I feel it's what's happening because I believe what I'm seeing on the screen in this particular instance. It's upsetting, and I think it would be to most people outside of that pocket, go like, oh, how can we have such hatred to another human being? And then the irony of a culture and a religion, which is, you know, as we know in the Second World War, underwent the Holocaust, to then be doing it to someone else. Like there's this really cognitive dissonance that's happening, and it's really frustrating. And I just want war to stop, and I just want, you know, the innocent part of me, the childlike part of me doesn't understand how we can perpetuate these things with all that we know and our communication capacity through technology and all these sort of things, but it still happens. And then I try to have, just as a personal practice, I try to have compassion. I try to go, could I be that person? And I could be that person. I felt into it. And if I was brought up in a culture, particularly if it was religious and it had this kind of doctrine of like, I'm doing this to save my soul, and, you know, that extra weight, I could, me, like no difference, same mind, same body, same personality, this person here, brought up in a different culture, a different time, or in this time, in a different culture, I could be someone there shouting death to blah, blah, you know, fill in the gap, whoever I want death to. I could be that person because I can imagine growing up where your, whatever it is, your land has been taken, or your uncle or grandfather was killed, or there's bombs going off, or you hear there's a terrorist thing in your local down the street and your sister died, whatever. I can imagine really wanting vengeance, and I can imagine having this skewed perception that this particular type of people are evil for some way. I think that's so important, to have the humility to understand how we are programmable. And there, I also think there's a certain responsibility to program ourselves consciously. And it's not nice to think of the idea of being programmed, is it? It's like, no, I want to be free spirit. I want to be sovereign. I want to just be like, you know, in the moment and true to myself and flow and love. But I just don't think we're there yet. I honestly don't. I think that we as a species are still in our adolescence. I think we're still going through so many growing pains as a species, evolutionary speaking, which might take several generations to play out. Maybe, who knows, centuries. I don't know. But I don't think that we truly can say we're not programmed. We are so influenced. And it's so easy as well. Like, don't sleep for 2 days. Shit gets weird. Don't eat for a few days. You're going to have like some serious changes. Of course, you know, there's drugs, you know, do whatever, tab, pill, blah, inject, blah, sniff, snort, blah. Like, shit gets weird really quickly. Personality changes really quickly. Values change really quickly. Life can go from one day seeming really easy and happy, and you've got enough money and your relationship's good and everything's next day, plummeting down. Some might call it bipolar. Like, I definitely experience sometimes, you know, really positive and awesome, and then other times really like, things are really hard. I feel empty. Why? And not that much externally has changed. It's not like there's been a whole recalibration. It's not like my bank account has totally been emptied, or even when it is empty, I can be happy, and it's not always indicative of an external change. But for me, it's sugar. Like if I eat sugar, I just feel so much, not just more tired, but like things are just not quite, they don't flow with ease. So the point being is, I believe we're quite programmable. So let's program ourselves intentionally. I'm also listening to another book. I've quoted a few books I'm listening to at the moment. I multitask my education. So there's another one called The Field that I'm listening to, talking about the way that we can, even not consciously, but on a anatomical, physiological level, we shift when things like someone's looking at us. They did this test where one person was in one room, another person was in a different room, and there was a camera watching the subject. And the observer would look at a screen, not even in the same room, look at a screen at the camera, which was the camera was showing them the person. And when measured on a really, biometric level, like plugged into kind of like a lie detector-esque kind of machine, their physiology would change when they were being looked at. And they did other tests where they saw if people could affect, I think it was blood cells. Blood cells were put in a particular substrate or some kind of thing, and they were going to have the cell walls dissolved or something. And through intentionality, people could affect the biochemical or interaction between the components and things. So there's a lot of research being done. Maybe it's like psi, as in like psychic kind of work, ESP, extrasensory perception kind of research. But if you are to believe these studies, then there's a huge capacity for ourselves to actually program and alter reality through our intentionality. So I just think it's fascinating that if we look at program, we can go all the way to being a cyborg, like having a Neuralink implanted and, spending all of our time in a mediated reality where we Google in order to see the room in front of us. That's quite an extreme. And we could argue that therefore we would be programmable. But I think on the current level, we are already programmable. We are already living in a simulated reality, even if it's just because we simulate reality through our senses and create our own interpretation in our subjective minds as well. So all of this is to say, and thanks for those who are watching. I come down here. Cam, thanks for putting all your information, talking about the Vedas, talking about the body like being hardware, the subtle body being software, spirit being a user. Nice. I'm digging this dialogue. If anyone else is interested in these kind of dialogues, I'm going to be putting out a podcast. I've started it just with the first episode called Games Without Borders. But if you're interested in games, technology, and humanity and nature and psychology and spirituality, check it out. I think it's on Spotify called Games Without Borders. There's just a single intro at the moment, but I'm going to be populating that more regularly. Also, if you want to jump on anytime, I'm always up for live dialogues on camera. And I'm really fascinated at this idea of giving myself to the game. I'm 39. I turned 40 at the end of this year. And I'm really interested. I feel like I'm right smack bang in some kind of middle. I don't like to think of myself as middle-aged. I don't feel middle-aged. But, mathematically, no, I'd like to think that I'd live beyond 80. I have a goal to live to 103, so I'm technically not at my half-life point, if that's what half-life means. I'm not halfway there yet. However, I've done a lot with myself. This is as far as I got. Happy with where I got to, thinking I'd do better. Can you do better with me? So this game, Vicarious, starts to hand myself over. And it's a very lo-fi approach. Like, you're not literally going to be plugged into my brain. You're not going to be able to get my arm to go up and down. Like, maybe there'll be some suit. I'll be totally into an exoskeleton that someone else could control. That'd be amazing. And we're probably very much within the realms of possibility to do that if I had the budget. Right now, we don't. It's just an indie game, lo-fi. Jump on a Zoom call with me. Look through my camera. But I really want to start to pair up with universities and AI researchers and other technologists and data scientists to see how I can leverage the hive mind. In Cam's example here, how can the spirit or the user be replaced from my consciousness to your consciousness? Still got the same software, still got the same hardware, it's still me, but what could happen in my life if you made my decisions? And I think there's a huge economic potential to leverage the exoticism, and it could be fetishized, it could be tokenized, but if you live in a space that is, I guess classified as, say, for example, a third world environment and you're trapped there economically, you can't leave. What would happen if someone would pay you, I don't know, $100, $200, maybe more, to be able to walk a day in your shoes, go and collect the water from a well, see what it's like on the ground level of a place, you know? And that could be a wonderful experience, a hugely eye-opening for the player, and totally transform someone's life who doesn't have necessarily a skill set that can plug into the modern day economy, and therefore they get locked into their current culture or environment, and it could totally free them. Another use of this game could be someone that is has a certain, if they're restricted in their body, if they're neurodiverse or physically incapable in some way. I had someone play me who couldn't leave the house, and then she was getting me to go down to a river and engage with the water with my feet. And, are there ways that people might want to vicariously live through a fully able-bodied or mobile-bodied, I should say, person? That could be a really, really beautiful thing, particularly if we could start to have virtual reality and, haptic feedback suits with, I've seen the speaker as like a body mount speaker so that the sound sort of reverberates through you. And there's also this, so haptic feedback is kind of like these vibrations which show tactile sense. So there's some amazing advances with that, where a surface just on a flat screen can feel slippery or spiky or grainy simply through the vibrations on the screen. So imagine you had Vicarious being played by someone with a VR goggle and a haptic feedback suit. It would start to become very, very convincing as a reality that now you are living literally through the Vicarian. That's the person who's like the human avatar. Willful possession, exactly. It's willful possession. And there'll be certain things within the game design where I don't want this to become like making snuff movies. And there'll probably be a black market version of it where people are doing really destructive things. But there's certain inbuilt things in Vicarious where it's like, don't cause harm to yourself or another. Don't break any laws. Really simple kind of things. The point system is based on mental and physical well-being. On resources, which include making money, and network, which include having a good reputation amongst the people you do meet and making new friends and connections to enhance your life. So there's like an inbuilt benevolence and wellness in the system that I'm designing. But beyond that, it's about stepping into the unknown. And I think at a time like now where so much is being rewritten, history, technology, medicine, religions, economies, with this huge shift going bankless, coming out of the fiat or government-based system into cryptocurrencies and things like that, and DeFi, decentralized finance, where we're becoming our own banks, starting to be able to leverage cryptocurrencies to put out loans and of real-world money, as in fiat currency or the government-issued money. Like these things are happening. So all of the old systems are starting to crumble. So we need to be ready for the unexpected, the unknown. And so my games, through whether it be Vicarious or anything else through open world theater, is all about coming back to the fool. That fool who steps over the cliff in the tarot and just has trust. This is the space that I'm really interested in exploring and creating art tools and art machines which engage in a very kind of surrealist, absurdist way, playfully, silly, but also beautifully whimsical and looking into the metaphysics of reality and looking into the poetic nature of our soul. I'm really interested in creating games and systems and machines that can interface with creativity, with practical things like enhancing the way we grow food or the way we make buildings or whatever it is, and experiment and explore. I don't want to be the conservative, reliable company. Open world is not that. Open world is the laboratory. It's the petri dish. It's the place which welcomes in the different things, and some of them can be destructive, some of them can be creative. But I do believe in the natural, would you call it homeostasis? I'm not sure. Like the natural balancing factor in nature. And I think that we are quite robust as a species, as an individual, mentally, physically, emotionally. I'm not one to try and wrap people in cotton wool. I think that often the avoidance of things is more painful and destructive than the experience of the thing we're trying to avoid. And that's often when I do things with what I call threshold release techniques, which is where we go into cold water, or we fast, or we do some scarification, or whatever it is, we come to an edge and we learn to soften across that and open into it. You know, breath work often happens. You have this breath and you have this thing called tetany, which is when your limbs get really tight and there's this edge. It feels like a death of sorts, and we can avoid it, we can limit, or we can go across that and dissolve across the limit. And almost one for one, every time that happens, there's more life on the other side of that apparent little death. You know, the Buddhists talk about dying before you die. This is something I find really fascinating, is that as we don't avoid, as we open to life, we just find there's more and more pleasure, more and more beauty, more and more intelligence, more and more love. I mean, I could go on, but maybe I'll wrap it up there. Thank you for those people who are watching. Those who are watching the replay, feel free to comment and I'll come back and check. If you're interested in these kind of dialogues, please check out Games Without Borders on Spotify. It's my new podcast. If you're interested in playing me in Vicarious, leave a comment or DM me, private message me. And I'm going to be ideally getting back on the screens and in life very soon. And I'm really interested in continuing this dialogue around human versus machine, around the individual versus the hive mind. And I don't think it has to be versus. I think there's a way to integrate in a really constructive way. It is unknown and it is scary, but I think that is the only way to grow. And I don't think it's going to be as harmful as we think it will be. I think that beyond the boundary of our control and our known safeties is more life and more love and more chances to balance the things which are currently unbalanced. It's not like we live in a perfect world and we just need to keep it, you know, if it was, maybe I'd be more conservative because I want to conserve what exists. But I don't want to conserve what exists because what exists is so destructive and unbalanced. There's so many people who are homeless and starving. There is so much racism. There's so much destruction through the military-industrial complex. There's so much poverty through the current, financial system. There's so much sickness through the current medical system. Like, we don't need to preserve this thing. We need something that is beyond the known. And therefore, I'm here to explore the hazardous field, the outlands of what post-humanism, transhumanism, cyborgism, all these things could mean. And post-self-help, what it could mean if I trust you and the hive mind and the collective and maybe even the internet to puppet my life as a human individual in the modern world. Thank you for watching, listening, and sharing this think tank with me. I am Atlas Talisman, and this is your life.